forum. He is a PhD from the University of California, Berkeley, and he has been named many important things as the top 100 public intellectuals by the American Journal of Foreign Policy in 2008. He is the only Chinese political scientist listed in the most cited Chinese researchers, and he has a lot of books, interesting books, that have been translated to English, Japanese, Korean, Farsi, and Albanian also, which was very interesting for me. And today he will present to us the last book, which is entitled Leadership and the Rise of the Great Powers. Thanks, Professor Xuetong, for being with us, and thanks for sharing this moment with us. And we hope this is one of the many times we can have you, and next time you can come on the summer to Chile, because it's a nice summer.
Yeah.
And you can enjoy it. Thanks, Andres.
So thank you, Dorothea. Thank you for attending the presentation of Professor Jan books. Leadership and the Rise of the Great Powers, published by the Princeton University Press in 2019. So the dynamics of this morning conference will be as follows. Firstly, Professor Jan will present the main arguments of his book. Afterwards, I will proceed to make a few comments, a brief comment on the book, and finally, there will be some time for Q&A. So there will be 3 rounds of questions. We would like to collect this question in a chat. Please try to write sample and direct question. We would like to apologize in advance, as most likely we will not have the time to answer all questions asked. For now, we would like to turn to the Professor Jan with his presentation. Thank you, Professor Jan.
Okay, thank you. And first, I highly appreciate your efforts and of your center to organize this opportunity for me to share my ideas with your distinguished friends. And also, I highly appreciate Professor Lopez and to provide this opportunity and to have so many people attend this discussion. And actually, I want to know, the first round, I gave a presentation about my book for 15 minutes or 20 minutes.
Yeah, it's okay, 20 minutes. We have time.
20 minutes? Okay. Okay, 20 minutes. Now let me share the screen with you. And this is the cover of this book. So from this cover, you will see that, and this is talking about the leadership. And the actual leadership for what? And I'm talking about how a national leadership make a country to rise up, to catch up with the dominant power or the hegemony. So for a long time, and IR theories studied how a hegemon to maintain its domination or leadership in the international system. But there are very few studies about how the new power to rise up, become a new hegemon. And certainly everyone was talking about Paul Kennedy's book about the rise of the rise and the fall of the great powers. But unfortunately, that book mainly talking about why the hegemon declined. It talks about the fall of the great powers instead of talking about how a power rises up. So this theory try to explain among all of these major powers why some states can rise up to replace the dominant power, the country, but not in others. For instance, after Cold War, and we use term, and one superpower with several major powers, then the question is that, can we tell which of the other several major power will rise up? So come to the specific issue, question, why is China instead of the other countries to rise up? to catch can become the major power to compete with the US. So that's the theory and explained. Okay, now this is the basic mechanism of the explain how a country to change the international configuration, how they change the international norm and change the international system. And first, look at this. The leadership is regarded as an independent variable. And that means the type of leadership is very, very important. It determines a country will become strong, or a country maintain the same, or the country will decline. And so the leadership not only make a country strong, and also undermine its own country. And people may believe that no leaders, no national leaders want to undermine their nations. That's true. They do not want to, but they do. And I don't think Trump want to undermine the United States. I don't think Trump want to make the US lose its global leadership. But his policy and irrational. His policy is not that moral. So his policy and make the US lose its international leadership, and make US economy growing slower, and make the US influence and decline. So actually, the type of leadership will decide whether the national leadership with a country rising up or going down. So what's the mechanism in this square? The square is that depends on how much the leadership can carry out reform in its country. For instance, and Obama and have a strong desire to reform the United States. Unfortunately, he do not have that capability to implement what he planned. And Trump has the capability to implement what he wants, but actually that is not a make progress. It's a make a disaster to the US. So in that way, that's why the leadership decided a country growing stronger or declining faster. So because the leadership's different policy have a different impacts on their national capability, and then gradually they will change the international configuration. Certainly, it's not a short term, and we cannot say the China and the narrow the power gap with the US because of only one leader. No, it started from Deng Xiaoping and then the Jiang Zemin and then Hu Jintao and then now the current leader. And what I mean, it means that Deng Xiaoping's principle, opening up and reform, have been carrying out for several decades. So this country, the ruling party, and they continue to reform the country one year after another, continuously for decades. So the reform make China and growing faster. And if you compare with the US, in last 40 years, the US didn't change that much. In the last 40 years, and the US leaders didn't reform the United States very much. They keep the system same, they keep many things that's still the same like the 40 years ago. And so that's why, and the US did the reform better than Japan, Germany, than the other European countries. But in comparison with China, and the US did not do that much reform as China did in the last 40 years. So today in China, all of the intellectuals still strongly encourage the government. We need to reform. We reform not fast enough. We need to reform the country as fast as possible and can never stop. Reform can never be implemented. Reform will continue and forever. It can never stop. Okay, so because one countries, I mean the rising countries, did more reform than that in the dominating power or hegemon power. So the international configuration changed. And that means the power structure of the world changed. Then, along with the change of international configuration, then what changed? And it depends on the leadership, international leadership. So international leader possibly change. When you have a new international leadership, the new leadership will, a new type of leadership, not a new leadership, a new type of leadership, they will change the international norms. Then they provide new leadership, and then they will change the international norms. For instance, and Roosevelt, and after World War II, he provided, for me, is a very desirable leadership, and I call it humanitarian leadership. So this kind of leadership and provide new norms based on the UN. It's called sovereignty norms and the equal norms. And then they change the international system and they change the international order. And after the Cold War, and Senior Bush also want to change the new order. And then, with Clinton, they adopted the liberalist norms and make the world becomes with a liberalist order. Now, when Trump came to power, this international leadership changed. Trump is not the type of leadership of a humanitarian. And he's not humanitarian leadership, and he's a very different type of leadership. So he shaped the international norm toward a very opposite direction from the liberalist order. In what way? And American first principle, and the commercial protectionism, and the political isolationism, and take no responsibility for allies, and never implement the trust, and never implement the international agreements that signed by the US. So you see, they take the leadership to change the international norms. So now we find that the world order becomes different. So after they change the world norms and also change the international configuration, and then what? International system, and will meet with a transition and a transformation of the system from one type to the other type. So if we regarded the transformation of the international system, I would say it mainly transfer from what? Transfer from the international system after the Cold War, so-called post-war system, or they also call it Yalta system, to what? To a new type of international system. What it is, I don't know. Now people said we go back to the Cold War, and I say no, this is not new Cold War. It's a new system, new order, and different from Cold War, different from post-Cold War. So because what? Because the international leadership changed. Okay, so what kind of leadership? I categorize international leadership in 4 types: human authority, and hegemony, tyranny, and democracy. First, I will say, and the type of international leadership are different from the national leadership, because the national leadership means the leadership to guiding the behavior of its own people, or guiding the activities within one country. So that's a different type and different categories. And because that leadership is based on their legitimacy, military power. But for the international system, different. Domestic society is a hierarchical system. International system is an anarchical system. So international leadership is not elected, not selected, not nominated by anyone, not like a domestic leadership. So international leadership based on what? Based on their capability, based on their morality, based on their influence. So, in regarding the type of international leadership, I will divide them into 4 types. Human authority, that's the most desirable, not very often, and but we do have. So just now I said Roosevelt is a very typical one, and certainly we have a very horrible one, like a tyranny leadership, and Hitler will be that kind of leadership, and very typical. And then hegemonic leadership, like the senior Bush, and or the Clinton, and the hegemonic power. And then the other, a democracy. And this is also that popular, like hegemony, or even not that popular like a tyranny. But then we do have one. And today, I think already some American and scholars and regarding Trump as a democracy leadership. So you see, this is the first type of leadership. They have a different strategic preference to dealing with, for maintaining world order. So because their strategy are different, so the result of their policy and will be different. So generally speaking, the leadership of human authority will make the world order stable and durable. And a democracy leadership will make the world chaotic and uncertain. And the tyranny and the leadership will make there's a lot of wars. A democracy may not cause a wars, and they may just make the order, make the world in disorder, but not necessarily war. But tyranny would definitely make the world fall into war. And the hegemony and can stabilize the world order by what? Sometimes by bullying others. And this world order and may be unfair. And many countries and dissatisfied with the order and shaped by the hegemonic pressure. So that's it. So now I think my time is almost up. I wrap up my theory. My theory actually regarded national leadership of the great powers is an independent variable to explain the change in international configuration, international norms, international order, and international system. So that means I use the personal level analysis to explain the change at the system level. I think for most of our IR scholars knows that, and Kenneth Walls said that there are 3 levels of analysis: individual, state, and system. So I use for Walls, he concerned that it's impossible to use a variable at one level analysis to explain the change in the other level situation. But actually I did. I think that we can use the individual level analysis to explain the change in system level. Second, and this is maybe provocative, and my theory challenged the liberalist theory, mainly the liberalist institutional theory. And the liberal institutional theory strongly emphasized the role of the institution. So they regarded institution as an independent variable. They concern the difference of institution would decide the growth of the country and the strength and the change at the international level. And actually, I think the current case, especially in the United States, and the Trump and shows to us, American institution cannot constrain Trump's policy. And Trump can do what and against the institution required. So why it happened? I think the mechanism is like this, because all institutions have to function through human beings. All functions have to, social functions or the political function, institutions have to function through leadership. Leadership has the power. They can shape institutions. They can change, they can modify, they can even damage and change the institution. So that's why, that's my argument. The national leadership plays a more role than institution in the change of the world, in the growth of the national capability. And so I think this is something happened not only to the US, not only to Trump. So if we look at the situation in Russia and in Turkey, in UK, and in several countries, and you find that the leaders can change the country and with the same institution. And you have different leaders with the same institution, and you find that they will make the country grow. Sometimes could be faster or could be slower. So that's why this theory possibly is a little bit difficult for institution believers to accept, because they believe institutions still play more fundamental role than leadership. Well, that's it.
Thank you, Professor. I really appreciate it. So now I proceed with some few comments. So we can have time to do a Q&A with the student and the scholar. So remember, we would like to collect this question, the question of the scholar and the student in a chat. So leadership and the rise of the great powers, which aims to explore international leadership and the mechanisms behind power transition, could not be more timely. This is an insightful and carefully written book that provides a new theory that explains why few rising states had been able to replace the dominant state. So Professor Jan's answer is the quality of political leadership. This leadership capability is based on the leadership's capacity for reform and hold international strategic credibility, without which a country cannot wield global authority. The most important theoretical contribution of the book, in my perspective, is in challenging a systematic approach to international relations, as it brings down the level of analysis of to the individual. At the core of Jan's thought on political leadership is an attempt to formulate a theory which can identify the mechanisms by which individuals, as political leaders of the great powers, can change power structure at the systemic level. So political leadership is not easy to use as a theoretical variable. This differs from the standard realist theory, which largely emphasizes relative power as the key variable in both state behavior and international outcomes. So the key difficult is to find a way to define leadership in a theoretical usable manner, especially because of the problem of the tautology. So if we define a leadership as a human leadership based on its behavior, how then can we use this characterization to predict its behavior? So here the professor Jan gives us a challenge for a scholar of international relations. So we should think of developing typologies of regime to predict their behavior. So I am sure that will be a a fruitful avenue for future research. So last but not least, it seems that Russia is an underrepresented player in this approach. So I would like to end by leaving a question about it. So Professor Jan, assuming a bipolar world between China and the United States, what could be the role of Russia? I try to say also on Sunday, Professor Mecha Haima suggests to Argentine journalists that the United States should approach Russia similarly as Kissinger and Nixon in the 70s with China. So next we will begin with the question. Our research assistant, Christina, will proceed to read them in 3 rounds of the 3 questions. Thank you, Professor. So, Christina, please.
You want me to deal?
So, I just will, at the moment we have two questions, right? Christina?
Yeah. Yeah, I can repeat them.
Yeah. Okay, we have this the 3rd one. So I will just share with you. So we can start with these 3 first questions. Let me 1 second. This will be the 3rd one. Okay. Great. Thank you, Christina.
Okay, I'm gonna repeat the one that you already said. Assuming a bipolar world between China and the United States, what role do you think Russia would have? The second question, considering the history of the United States and Latin America and the Cold War, or this new Cold War between Trump and China, do you think China will have a more intense cooperation agenda with Latin America? And the last one, how do you envision the configuration of the international system will be if Joe Biden wins the November elections? Would he be a more conventional and less disruptive leader? Or would the tensions between the US and China continue to grow?
Thank you, Professor. I will unmute your phone. Yes.
Okay. First a question about the role of the Russia. Well, when we're talking about the role of each state, and now generally speaking, and we have talking about their capability. And any country, their influence on the global issues or the international affairs, and based on their capability. So generally speaking, the Russian, by this moment, and their capability is no longer superpower, and even among the major powers, is not the strongest one. Although US have, Russia have the largest nuclear arsenal, but their economy is too small. The size of the Russians' GDP is even less than South Korea. You know, it's less than South Korea. So with that kind of material capability, and the Russians have still have influence in Europe, in neighbors, but Russia cannot have influence beyond this region. So we cannot see Russians' influence in Latin America, in Africa, in Australia, and even on the Iran or the other things. So their influence and is limited. And for all of the, not only Russia and the other major powers, and even the UK, and the UK's withdrawal from the EU, then what? Only have impact on Europe, and the countries in the other continent and beyond Europe, and do not just talking about it, but no one can feel any impact on their life. Second, about the China's policy toward the US. China and very eager to keep cooperative relationship with the US. But from my understanding, and the US said, wait a minute, and the US adopted a decoupling strategy. Decouple whom? Decouple China. And the US did not want to cooperate with China because Trump administration believe and China benefit more from the cooperation with the US than the United States. So his policy is very clear. Cut off the cooperation and then don't let China benefit from the cooperation. So even China want to cooperate with the US and it was frequently rejected by the United States. Talking about the global leadership. First, and US is still the largest power in the world, strongest country in the world. So the US should provide global public goods or global leadership. Unfortunately, and the Trump administration make it very clear, and US has no interest in providing global leadership in that way because it's too costly, because the Americans do not benefit from it, because China benefit from the globalization more than US, and so the US decided to shape off in global leadership. So that's why we see the US withdraw from one after another the institutions of the United Nations. And China, and many countries expect China to provide a global leadership. Unfortunately, I think that's beyond China's capability. Leadership is based on your capability. Global leadership based on global capability. So that's why during the Cold War, and the US cannot provide global leadership, and he had to share the global power with the Soviet Union. And the US only provided global leadership after the Cold War, when Soviet Union collapsed. So in the future, at least a decade, 10 years, and we possibly will face a world without global leadership. This situation may last for 2, 3, and even 4 decades. That's it.
Thank you, Professor. So now, Christina, please, we can continue with the second round of questions.
Yep. A few times, Deng Xiaoping, I hope I pronounced that name properly, has made the comment that China will always be a third world country, even if it became rich and powerful. What would that mean for the global South? How could China's leadership reflect that third worldism? How does China's approaches to moral leadership to countries that function in a democratic way, moral leadership defined not in how national interest is achieved, but what national interest ought to be? And the last one, the new concept of common destiny of mankind is being proposed by the Chinese government at international level. What is the precise meaning of that concept for changing international norms, for the acceptance, transformation, and acceptance of international law in respects of human rights, a key pillar of post-World War II of the post-World War II international system, and for the organization of socio-economic cooperation collectively or in a hub and spoke system?
Should I respond to these questions?
Yes, please, Professor.
Or wait for more? Should I respond to these 3 questions or wait for more questions?
Yeah, no, I think the second round, only 2 questions, and then we can continue with the last round with 3 more questions.
Okay. Well, first about China's international identity. Deng Xiaoping once said, even we become as rich as a developed country and still maintain the identity as a developing country. What does it mean? from understanding that means a political identity rather than economic identity. So it means economically, possibly we are richer than all of those third world countries or developing countries. But politically, we will still take sides with the developing countries. That's why China by now still resists the identity as a developing country. From understanding, it's no longer the developing country, the identity of developing country for China is no longer based on economic concept, based on economic standard, and it's become the political standard. And what I mean being a developing country? Being a developed country means that, okay, the world is unfair. The developing country do not have the same power and as much as the developed country. So we should make the developing country have the same power like the developed country. So that means a change, a shape, a new world order. Second question is about the morality. In what way and China will adopt the provide a moral leadership for the world? First, I would say the moral realism is my personal theory. By now, have not adopted by my government. I don't know whether my government will adopt my theory and as the official principle, whether they want to use my theory to guide their foreign policy. And I don't know. But at least at this moment, and the government didn't show any interest in my theory. And I would say, what I mean morality for international leadership? Morality of international leadership, it doesn't mean that that country and concern or take care of other countries' interests first. No. And even China maintain the identity as a developing country. It doesn't mean that China will concern that make a foreign policy and based on the interests of the developing countries. It's certainly based on its own interests first. But then, in what way is a morality moral? Moral means that I certainly adopt a policy based on my interests. Meanwhile, I do not want to hurt others' interests. If there's a conflict between my interests with your interests, we can negotiate about how to find the middle point, how to find an approach to achieve the win-win situation. So how to turn the zero-sum game into a win-win game. So that means morality. So international morality, if we define it very, very narrowly, what I mean, it means undertake international responsibility, have a good international strategic credibility. Okay, so what I mean responsibility? Responsibility means that you implement what you signed. You implement and what you promised. You keep your promise good. And so it doesn't mean that he's benign and to his enemies, no matter how much the country was hurt by the enemy, by rivalry, and they still are benign to them. No. It means that they keep their promise good. If they say that if the country promise to help a country, it should do it. If we keep promise, his friends will punish any or narrowly defined as the international strategic credibility of the term, the a common destiny of the human. Well, actually, I found that recently the Chinese government officially translate the term 人类命运共同体 into the common future of humanity. So they're talking about a common future. And so the common future from understanding, it doesn't mean exactly the same as a community. Community is based on what? Based on common interests. We have the EU, that's a community, right? European community. And before the European Union. Community based on common interests. So if we talk about the community of humanity, and then we're talking about a common interest we share. But now if you translate the term into the common future, that means we have the same future. Could be good, could be bad. If bad, we suffer together. If good, we share together. So nowadays, from my understanding, the term and actually it's a debatable in China, and there is not a very clear definition for it, and the people are still studying and the component of this term.
Thank you, Professor. So now we'll continue with the last round of questions. So please, Christina.
Yes, the last round I'm gonna divide into two different categories. So the first one is more about world regions. Those are two questions. What do you think about the leadership and influence of India? And how complex, or even not, is the view of the Chinese elite about Latin America? And compared with other regions, what do you think are the main issues that are important for Beijing when engaging Latin America? Do you think China will have a more intense cooperation with Latin America? And the second category, how does moral realism conceive China's cooperation policy as an instrument of foreign policy or as a principle? You keep saying that reform is always necessary for a country to rise, but what kind of reform are you referring to? And the last one, countries that behave politically in a democratic way are slaves of the national interest dilemma, just as you argued as well, but do not necessarily have political leaders that respond only to programs, but also elections. And this looks like a difficulty for China to portray itself as a soft power with political leadership, but rather with a big political value for the good or for the bad. What does your theory bring regarding to this difficulty? What does it bring to it?
Well, very good questions. And let's start from the very first one with the Indian. And actually, I'm not an expert on Indian study. So I have very limited knowledge about Modi. And Modi provides a very nationalist leadership. And even in India, and people call him nationalist leader. His policy in the first term and tilted toward reform and opening up. But the second term, from my understanding, he shaped the direction of his policy. He shaped towards the so-called self-independence. So you see, and last month, and he suddenly ordered to stop and 49 Chinese APP. And this APP is a pure economic program and for people you know. And ordinary than why? From my understanding, he's talking about the Indians' independence, economic independence, security independence, military independence, everything, independent from interdependence with other countries. So in that way, I believe, and the Indians' growth and cannot be as high as the people expected. And the people in the world and actually hope India's economy growing faster than Chinese economy. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. My understanding, it could not happen. The reason is very simple, because the Indian do not want to open itself. And the Indian is very much more democratic than China, but India is much less open than China. China is not that democratic like India, but China is much open than the India. So without an open policy, and I doubt India can make its economy grow as fast as the Chinese economy. Second, about the Latin America. So how important Latin America to China? And I would say Latin America is only economically important to China because the geographical location is far from China. And in terms of politics, and the Latin America cannot provide the same political support like African countries. Africa have 54 countries. They dominate the votes in the UN. And the Latin American countries cannot dominate the votes in the UN. And the Latin America is so close to the US. US regards Latin America as a backyard. So China do not want to have any conflicts with the US in this region. So China very consciously control its political policy in Latin America to avoid any political, military, cultural conflicts with the US. China do not want to compete with the US in the other sectors except economy. So from my understanding, Latin America is mainly economically important to China, not politically, culturally, and militarily. The last question, the third question is about multilateralism. And China officially advocate the multilateralism. Then the question is, how much China can implement that? And actually, from my understanding, multilateralism and depends on what? Depends on the mutual interaction. And China advocated multilateralism, not like the Germany. Germany can implement a multilateral policy within the EU because there's a historically provided that arena as the EU for Germany to implement multilateral diplomacy. Beyond Europe, and Germany still cannot make its multilateral diplomacy efficient. The same. And in East Asia, by now, you find that there's no very effective regional institution. The regional institution in Africa, in Middle East, in Latin America, are more efficient than the regional institutions in East Asia. The reason is that because the competition between the US and China make no regional institution can function well. So in that way, China can only, from my understanding, China will do this kind of multilateralism in a different way. So China do it in what way? Like this way. China, Africa, China, Latin America, China, Europe, China, Middle East. So on the one side is China. On the other side is many countries. So this kind of multilateralism for the other countries concerned, it's only semi. It's a semi-multilateralism. It's not a pure multilateralism. That is the situation. The last question about political values. Actually, Chinese government highly advocate its own political value. But this value, from my understanding, are different. Political value are different from most of the countries. Most of the countries have the similar political system like United States. And have the elections. China China system only similar with the export our value, export our political system. But meanwhile, China tell the world, we do not want to copy or learn and imitate your political value and your political system. So for a very long time, I think China will continue use the term everything with Chinese characteristic. So always with the Chinese characteristic means what? Different from others. That's it. So in terms of ideology, and China very recently, and the deputy foreign minister and the foreign minister and make an announcement, deliver speeches, and very clear. China do not want to have a ideological competition with the United States. China looking for the peaceful coexistence of different values and different civilization and political systems. So that's it. Okay.
Thank you, Professor. So we are almost on time. So the idea is to finish 10:30. So what do you think? Do you want a last question, or we can just stop here? We have 5 minutes.
Your micro is off. Sorry, Professor. Your micro is off.
Yeah, Professor.
Oh, I think we can continue for another 10 minutes for other questions.
Yeah. We have 2 more questions. So, I think the topic is not the same, but please, Christina, we can continue with the question 11 and 12.
Okay. You have talked about the influence of think tanks on the government in China. Could you deepen a little, like, could you talk a bit more about the topic and the influence on that? Okay. And the other question, very unrelated to that, in the South Sea of China, as we all know, there are different disputes on the maritime boundaries, incidents with fishermen and coast guards and those claims. Facing a possible engagement between the US and China in the South Sea of China, how do you see the profile of the leaders for limiting any misunderstanding?
Okay, the last questions, the last 2 questions.
Yes,
and first about the think tank. Because we are all scholars of the international studies, so we certainly hope our ideas with our thought have impact on policy making. In every country the same. Unfortunately, my understanding and that's a kind of hope are always being disappointed. And usually we believe Americans think tank very powerful. They have a strong impact on the policy making. But now you look at the Trump's situation, and the no think tanks, and no any, including Republicans, including the conservative think tanks, including the enterprises, traditional enterprises center, and no think tanks have any impact on Trump's policy making. He is a very personal, and sometimes he announced his policy without his assistance. I mean, close assistance knowing about it. So argument I want to make. Actually, how much think tanks has impact on the policymaker depends on the policymaker itself. If the policymaker is a type of person and willing to listen to different opinions, you gave concern about different opinions, and then what? He said, okay, think tanks is really important because I can always learn from their different ideas, because I find that their ideas are different from me, but it's helpful and favorable to my interests. And their ideas and helpful to the national interests. And so this really depends on the leadership. So if we look at this and how much, that's why we always say, hey, how closer the think tank is to the leadership. So my understanding is not how close you are to the leaders. It's how much the leaders want you to be closer to them. And so that's my understanding. So in China, the same. And generally speaking, I think most of think tanks has no impact on policy making. Policy making made by leaders, mainly based on the bureaucracy's reports, rather than the ideas or reports, consultants by the think tanks. No. And I find that especially, and in this age, and we find that there's a kind of change, and there's a lot of strong leadership, and most of strong leaders they are very reluctant and to listen. They're not accept. They're reluctant to listen to the think tank's idea. And come to the South China Sea. South China Sea is becomes a hot pot, and at this moment, it's not because the problems between China and the US, maritime disputes between China and related countries and turning hot. There's nothing changed. Everything's the same. And China has maintained the relationship with the South China Sea's countries as usual. No matter it's good or bad, it's still the same. Actually, the hot situation is kicked out by whom? The US. And the US suddenly shifted its policy towards the South China Sea. And before last month, and the US said that US take no signs, no stance on the disputes between China and the other countries, or actually the maritime disputes not only between China with others, and also between all of these other related countries. And so US said that they won't take stands on these disputes. Suddenly, and Trump, Pompeo make announcement. American changed its policy towards South China Sea last month, and US said that they oppose China's stance. Well, because the US changed its policy towards South China Sea, make the situation becomes hot. Nowadays, I think more and more people talking about how much the Trump administration will decide, make a determination to kick off a war in South China Sea. Now, people in China, my understanding, a lot of scholars or the amateurs of IR relations, and these people, and said, looking for, hey, which islands US is going to attack first? So you see, now all of the, and also the surrounding countries in the South China Sea, they're talking about where America will attack first. So actually, the current situation is caused by America's new policy towards South China Sea, and very recent. So if US do not want to have a war in this region, I don't think there's any war will occur. But if US want to have a war, at 100% will happen, because the US will take the initiative. They have the strongest navy in the world. They can attack, they can make a decision, attack any islands, every country, any facility in this region. So I don't know how much Trump administration decided to have a war in this region or not. But anyhow, and the people said, you cannot rule out any possibility, and that Trump may take. Okay?
Thank you so much for this interesting presentation, Professor Yan. and
Thank you very
bringing
much.
some interesting new thought on this topic. Thank you for taking your time, especially considering the big time difference, and that is quite
Thank
late
you very much.
for you already. Dorothea,
No,
please.
thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you.
And thanks for a
Thank
very
you.
interesting presentation. Y thanks to everybody. Muchas gracias a todos y los esperamos con el embajador de Irlanda a las 12.
Yeah, all of
Thank
you
you
are
very
welcome
much.
to visit our university whenever you have chance to come to Beijing. Okay.
Thank you, Professor.
On the summer. On the summer.
Yeah.
Next
Okay.
summer.
Okay.
Best
Next
regards.
summer.
Thank you
Okay,
very
good.
much.
Good.
Thank you everyone for participating.
Okay, goodbye. Goodbye. Bye-bye.
Share. Bye.
Bye.
再见。
Bueno, nos despedimos, ¿cierto? Gracias a todos y recuerden que revisar nuestros sitios web y redes sociales, que estamos siempre organizando actividades y también tenemos algunos programas de sistematización del estudio de China. Así que, por favor, lo invito a ver nuestras redes, nuestros diplomas, etc. Bueno, muchas gracias a todos y nos estamos viendo.